Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thank you for inviting me to give a presentation today. My name is Marcus Collier is my name, and I work in the area of sustainability science. My main area of research, or my main area of activity for the last quite a few years, has been the interface between social systems and ecological systems through transdisciplinary methods, not only using academic research, but also looking at research that can be done through other stakeholders, such as businesses, NGOs, and urban councils, cities, mainly citizen science as well. So you might have heard some mention this morning of nature-based solutions. I'm just going to talk about that. I'm going to put it in perspective from a European point of view. And then I'm also just going to finish up with some talk about how nature-based solutions and health can be an area that is slightly it's only beginning really to become noticed. It was when you mentioned about the sustainable use of nature as one of the main drivers of biodiversity conservation. Nature-based solutions was more or less derived as a way of trying to do that, and it came about. I'll just have a little bit of a background here, but it came about essentially with a group of us who were leading European research projects at the time in the area of resilience. We had mentioned this morning about resilience and how do we deliver resilience. So in the discussions, we noticed there was a lot of engineered solutions and design solutions and smart city solutions, but a lot of these solutions that were arriving were also what we started calling nature-based solutions. But around early 2000s, people started to discuss this type of idea, largely following on from the discussions around ecosystem services, natural capital. And we approached the European Commission and said, is there any way that you could start funding research into nature-based solutions? And I'll show you in the next slide how much they did invest in that area. But in the meantime, there was essentially a lot of discussion: how do we create, or how do we define nature-based solutions? So I suppose it's at the very basic level, nature-inspired, nature-derived. It's the idea that while we are using or deriving a solution to a problem for nature, it's providing us with multiple co-benefits, not just the benefit of whatever that problem it's trying to solve is, usually a climate-related problem or a biodiversity loss related problem. And if we can research, or if we can develop a natural approach to that, or a natural solution to that, can we derive co-benefits from that? So the International Union for the Conservation of Nature were the first ones really to attempt to stab at a definition, largely focusing on landscapes and livelihoods of people, mostly in rural areas. And around the 2015 period, 2014, 2015, the European Commission came on board and started to say, well, maybe we could turn this around. Maybe we could look at how this could be used in terms of innovation. And so they're focusing a lot on urban areas, which is because most of the population is living there. They started to talk about how can we innovate with nature? How can we develop these co-benefits that don't just benefit a regreening of our cities, or an expansion of our natural green areas into ways that we can also do so that will create companies, for example, create innovation, and also innovation in how we communicate, innovation in how we understand our relationship with nature. So ultimately, this was a way of attempting to reconnect people with nature at a very physical level. And as we've heard from the discussions earlier on about COVID, we saw that come into a very stark reality when people started to realize just how disconnected we were from nature, and how during the COVID period, a large amount of realization came about in relation to how we should be reconnecting ourselves with nature, or rewilding ourselves. A lot of people use that phrase. Whilst now in the last couple of years there have been quite a few more academic papers coming out, the big difficulty with these types of results from these projects, a lot of the projects that have come about through nature-based solution funding, is you're involving so many different disciplines, and largely all of these disciplines are crisis disciplines, like restoration ecology, conservation biology. These are basically disciplines that have arrived because of the need for society to tackle the urgent problems. And so it's difficult to kind of get the results out to as much as we can. But we do have alternative ways, and I just don't be taking photographs unless you want to use it. But this is in the website. It's the last one after the poster, is this particular page. Each one of these projects, I put my own one, Connecting Natures, first, of course, because that's the best one. But each one of these projects is hyperlinked to those projects' websites as long as they still exist. And since 2015, Europe has invested 665 million euro into direct research into the potency of potential and validification of nature-based solutions, the concept as well as the mainstreaming of it. So this year, I think there'll be about another 15 or 20 more projects directly related to the Bauhaus, directly related to nature-based solutions, and then also that are delivering on the UN Decade and Restoration Ecology projects. And you'll see that it's involves, well, I'd say there's probably going to be another 20 or 25 million, and it's probably going to creep up by 2029, 2030, looking at the long-term goals for the European Commission to be close to €1 billion of direct research fund or direct innovation and research funding from the European Commission alone. And then on the other side there, on the right-hand side, the lower end, you see other organizations, other countries are also researching in this area. So you combine that with the fact that not only is the European Commission investing in this, now other countries are starting to invest in it, but the World Bank is investing $1 billion, probably $1.5 billion. The European Investment Bank, about €500 million, in mainstreaming these types of solutions in cities. And as part of the Connecting Nature project that I was running, that finished just a short while ago, we developed a nature-based enterprise platform. So this was, where do we get where's the people who will be delivering this? What are the companies? Where are the jobs? How is this going to be physically delivered in real time? So we've developed this nature-based enterprise platform, which is still growing and building and getting more and more companies. And some of these companies will be very large companies, living roof companies, bioswale companies, those type of things. And also a lot of ones that are very, very small. And this goes back to one of the presentations this morning on mindfulness and so forest bathing and the type of ecotourism type of industries, which when you combine a lot of them together can be quite a substantial amount of activity in this sector, or developing the sector even further. So these are the types, and so we are seeing mainstreaming happening. We're also seeing combinations, and these are the types of things we're talking about. I wasn't going to blaze with loads of photographs of different types of nature-based solutions. We're talking about there's a lot of living walls. I prefer to say living walls instead of green walls, or living roofs and green roofs. We've gone from the monocrop, single species living green roof to a more diverse living roof where you have multiple species. We have combined technology here. This is a bio-solar roof. In my previous project, we experimented with this in the London Olympic site. It's still going very strong. And it's where you can combine the two technologies, and the combination of nature and the solar panels has meant the solar panel industry has had to change the way it looks, because they used to need to work at very high temperatures, but the plants cool the area down around them, so they kind of don't work so well together. And they didn't. Now they work very well together. And we see lots of other things. For us, it's water in Ireland. That seems to be the one main area, attenuation of water and flooding and so on. But in other parts of Europe, as you saw in the maps this morning, the heat island is incredibly difficult. That's one of our experimental sites in Ludwigsburg in Germany, where that's not into the ground. These are basically built like Lego. It's basically blocks of construction where you can construct your nature-based solution to tackle heat island in that situation of 40-degree summer heat. And then at the top left is our own Board BIA offices, where we don't mention too much about it a lot, but there is a lot of potential for indoor nature-based solutions and things like attenuating or capturing particulate matter and other types of chemicals, but also noise reduction. Noise was mentioned earlier on as well. So there's a lot of potential for, there's a lot of diversity of choice for nature-based solutions, and more besides. These are the physical nature-based solutions, the ones that you would see, but there are other types of ways of deriving value from nature. So, for example, we have used nature as a way of building cohesion between different communities. In our situation with Sarajevo, we used it there, where you can bring different communities together over a conjoined project, which actually happened to be both also about nature but also food, as was discussed as well earlier on. So we know that there's historically, those of you who know that, people like Ulrich and the Kaplans, there's been lots and lots of work done on the effect nature can have on the restorative powers of nature on people who are ill. It's well known. Research has been talked about for a long time. There's been a lot of publications from the 1970s, 80s, even before that on that. And we know that the co-benefits of nature are now better understood and are increasing in number. And we're starting to develop metrics, ways of measuring these. So there is increasing qualitative evidence that the direct and sometimes indirect impacts of nature-based solutions on people's health. We're finally starting to see the papers appearing more regularly now on things like stress, life expectancy, as was mentioned a few times. Sorry, I think I've wrote this all before I knew what you were going to say, so it's a lot of replication here, and other things. So we see a lot of this is starting to become more evident and be more quantified. So a lot of the qualitative evidence is starting to be more quantified, and that sounds like an unusual way of saying it, but it helps in terms of deriving policy and stimulating actions. The efficacy of indoor nature-based solutions, things like noise and air quality and so on, we're also starting to see some studies arriving at things like concentration, innovation, and that sort of thing are greatly boosted by being in a natural environment in an indoor situation. This was all very much hearsay. A lot of people would recognize that, but it was only recently that these are starting to quantify. So in an education situation, we know that classrooms that have a lot of plants in them will have better results in their students than classrooms that don't. But these all come with, pardon the pun, a health warning, because a lot of the research doesn't identify the single element of nature as being the sole contributory factor in this situation. So we're still quite a long way away from being able to say, if we put this here, then we will get that outcome and we'll be all very happy and healthy and so on. But we're going in the trajectory of, if I had a graph that had one of those angles on it, it would be going in the upward direction in terms of positivity. And then, as I mentioned earlier on, the connectivity, reconnecting people with nature, which is the area of research I'm doing now at the moment in terms of how people interact with wild spaces, especially wild spaces in urban areas, how that creates emotional responses. And those emotional responses can create changes in people's behavior. And behavioral change is exactly what we want when it comes to climate change. So if we can change people's behavior to be more positively oriented towards sustainability, then we're doing a good job. So we haven't published this yet, so it's still in the process of being tested. But already we're starting to see a definite link between reconnectivity through citizen science with wild nature or wild spaces. And some of these spaces are considered, wasteland, in fact, places that would not normally be considered useful or have a positive impact on humans. We start seeing that impact can change, can change people's behavioral approaches. And the area of restoration ecology, for a long time, a lot of the sciences and disciplines didn't particularly interact very well. But fortunately, now the ecological world is much more open to embracing qualitative sociological research, and it's starting to become much more integrated, and in fact it's starting to become much more replicable as well. It's one thing we have difficulty with social science research a lot of the time is replicability. So we're starting to see somewhat similar results in the same topic on different jurisdictions, or different topics in the same jurisdiction. We start to be able to build up an understanding of how things are going. And then finally, our current urban programs in terms of wilding, or rewilding, there is a difference there, or basically landscaping, that this has huge evidence of provision of co-benefits to people, and these co-benefits are now beginning to be measured. The difficulty with the measurement here, we're looking at very small numbers, very short projects, and it's still very short term. We really, unlike Tilda, we don't have that lovely length of time to do research over a period of time. But that's what the investment from the European community in nature-based solution research is intended to do, to create that long-term metrics validity, and also to show that it is effective. So I'd be remiss if I was standing in front of potential funders coming from the academic sector if I didn't mention what areas that could have future research. I know it's the closing dates tomorrow for the EPA and the the Health Research Board funding, which is wonderful to see how that's happened, and it's pleasant to see that the funding is increasing. However, there's quite a few areas that we would like to find out more. How can we mobilize nature to target specific health and well-being illnesses or issues? So how can we do this? So in other words, how can we, I hate to use this phrase, how do you weaponize it? How do you actually make it work? How does it work in a real-time situation rather than something that someone elects to do themselves? How can this be something that can be something that is so normal, it's like taking out the bins, or it's a very regular thing, or taking a course of treatment? And how does that fit with current health provision? How does nature fit into that? Now, we've heard quite a lot today about that. It was really pleasant to hear that there's the beginnings and a strong growth in this particular area, but it still needs pushing out a lot more. And we're still looking at isolated case studies rather than larger programs. Although I am very mindful that some of the larger programs that are policies that are coming out, such as the one we heard about food earlier on, really starting to gather a lot of momentum. And do we have enough expertise in the healthcare system? This is one of the things that has come up a lot in our own research. We have had research with doctors and health providers to say, well, look, we'd love to, but we just don't know enough about it, what to do, how to do. We really want to, and often they talk about a personal relationship themselves, but they don't know how to do it on a sort of more professional level. And then what elements of nature are we talking about? So one person's nature is another person's running out of the room screaming type of thing. So you do guess it's a lot. You're either talking about butterflies or spiders, and that divides the room almost immediately. So sometimes we know when we're talking about nature, are we talking about biodiverse nature, or are we just talking about plants? But the part of this goal here is not just to regreen our urban areas or regreen, it's actually to rewild, to make it more biodiverse, to make places more hospitable to animals and plants and nature, at the same time providing benefits to ourselves. So whilst they might be insulating our houses and keeping the stormwaters back, they also should provide habitats for these people. And that is one area. And if you look at all of those projects, and there's quite a few of those projects that are up there, I forgot to mention, that are being led by Irish researchers, Tyke McIntyre in Maynooth, and I'm sorry, I shouldn't start mentioning names because then I'll forget everybody, but there's quite a few of the university departments, yourselves in UCD, have this, and so we do have an expertise in the country, we do have an expertise in this area, and a lot of people doing this type of research, but when it comes to biodiversity, where does that fit in here? And it's still very much being industry led in some respects, that the companies that are putting these living structures into cities still very much would be, I would say, low biodiversity. See them only flowers for like a couple of minutes practically, and it doesn't really provide a lot of life for things. So very much we need to completely scale up in that area as well. And then just a few other final thoughts then in terms of our, like, would the client, would the customer have, would the patient, shall we say, have faith that it would work if they were prescribed to have a nature-based solution? Would that be something, if you go get out some fresh air and some green space? We saw the people doing this during COVID. We were being on the radio. We had a lot of programs on that were saying, take a break, look out, you look at some greenery, look into the distance. So we saw the elements of that, and people were genuine. Yes, and especially from the academic side, students were very much in our minds, and that's one of the things we're constantly telling them: stretch your back, stop looking at the screen, get a look at some nature, look at the sky, whatever that is. And we hear back a lot of very positive responses from that, and we could see that in some cases where people were very isolated, this was a hugely important thing. So how effective can this be? How can we measure this, and how can we measure it while we're changing as well? So as we go along, all these policies are coming out, and the new biodiversity policy that will be updated in 2027 or something. And so these will be new focuses on this, and much higher pressure on governments. Ireland is significantly behind Europe and many countries in this area. So there's going to be a huge change, or has to be a huge change legally in the coming years. So we have to do something about that. And what about artificiality? There's a lot of research from NASA and people of long-term space stays of how nature is being used in order to decrease stress and diffuse very complex and rather awkward situations in very close quarter living. So artificial replication of nature, this is a hugely unknown area in our real daily lives. So that's all I have to say. So thank you very much for your time.